So welcome to another Conversations with Legends series. These are always so much fun. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So Tom had just mentioned Mighty Networks, and we are moving over our platform from Discord to Mighty Networks. Looks like next week will probably be the launch. I think you guys are going to absolutely love it. It's a phenomenal platform. I will ask everybody that's on this call. Obviously, we don't have our full 500 members on the call. A lot of that is, we've got a lot of international members, etc. But I would highly encourage you that when we launch, make sure that you put your profile on there so that we can really interact as a community in a different format. So a little bit more housekeeping. So our next few Conversations with Legends series, let me just, you're getting this in your Friday newsletter, but on the 17th of May, we have Stephanie Malik, who is an absolute rock star CEO. On June 1st, we have Dahlia, who is, if you remember the commercial, Run Like a Girl, that won many awards way back in Super Bowl days, that was Dahlia that created that. And she just came out with a new book. Then on the 14th, we have Olympic gold medalist Joe Jacoby, who sent me a message this morning from Spain that he was going to be joining us. So I'm assuming he is on this call. And then I'm going to give you a little sneak preview because you guys are special because you joined us today. We have the one and only Meredith Vieira, formerly 60 Minutes correspondent and an absolute legend in broadcasting. She's going to be joining us probably sometime after Joe Foster, who is the founder of Reebok. So we're excited that Meredith's going to be joining our Legend series. It's going to be a lot of fun. In terms of book club, so our book this month is Bet on Talent. Bet on Talent was written by Deanne Turner. I hope everybody's reading this. We're going to be sitting down with her in June. She's a 30-year veteran of Chick-fil-A and was their head of talent for 30 years. Incredible book. Our book for next month is Magic Blue Rocks by April Sprints. We talked a little bit about that the last time. And then our book following that, if you want to get ahead, is The Lost Art of Connecting by my good friend, Susan McPherson. Absolutely tremendous books coming up, and many more to come to round out our year. So the format for anyone who has not been on a Legend series call, Elatia and I are going to spend about 30 minutes chatting. Then we're going to open it up to you guys to ask questions. And the cool thing about this is you can ask your question directly to Elatia. So all you need to do is in the chat, just say, I have a question. You don't have to put your question in there. And then we'll tee you up and we'll get you talking to Elatia. So we are very excited about that. So it's an honor to have Elatia Abate with us today. To give you a little bit of background on Elatia, she's the creator of Future Now. She's a Forbes leading futurist. She's a globally recognized keynote speaker. Her TED Talk, Pioneering the Future of Work, is phenomenal, absolutely incredible. She's been featured in work with Trevor Noah, Tony Robbins. Kathy, can you put Ashton on mute, please? Elatia is an instructor at Stanford. She's an instructor at the University of Chicago. She's also an instructor at the University of Toronto. She's the former global director of talent acquisition at Anheuser-Busch. and she's a former VP of HR at Dow Jones. So if that doesn't get you excited to talk to Elatia Abate, that is one heck of a resume. So Elatia, welcome to the Talent Champions Council and our Legends series. We are thrilled to have you.
Scott, thanks so much for inviting me here. I've been waiting with bated breath for this conversation.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So I have so many questions for you because I think the future of work, you know, there's so much stuff going on. Work from home, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gig economy, great resignation, lack of engagement, education is changing, at least options for education are changing. So I've got a million questions for you. I got to think, where should I start? I think one thing that's interesting, I read this book by Faith Popcorn called The Popcorn Report in 1991. Mm-hmm. And that was 31 stinking years ago. And this amazed me. So I looked at this today and it said, trend number 1, cocooning in a new decade. We're hunkering down, we're holing up, we're hiding out under the covers, we're home. That was written in 1986. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Faith is one of the legends, and Elatia is obviously one of the current leaders in this space. How in the world does somebody become a futurist? Because you started traditionally in corporate America, moved into entrepreneurship. So tell us how that happens.
Totally accidentally. And for me, it was a chance encounter with a self-driving truck. I had left the corporate world in late 2013, initially to solve for the challenge that most of the planet finds itself really unhappy at work, and to the tune of 80+% of the planet being disengaged or actively disengaged. So I initially left to solve for that. And I had some questions about where I should go with my business. And I ended up at a Tony Robbins business conference. And Peter Diamandis, one of the world's foremost futurists, jumps on the stage and starts talking about self-driving trucks and the technology behind them and what this is going to mean for logistics and manufacturing and business as we knew and understood it. And I was in the edge of my seat, on the one hand, excited, and on the other hand going, but wait, hold on. What are we actually going to do with all these people whose jobs are going to be replaced? And I started going down the rabbit hole, initially academic research, and then in January of 2017, decided to use my life as an experiment to go and search for answers to the question, how are we going to empower our success in the face of all of this uncertainty and all of this disruption? And that has led to the last 5 or 6 years. Actually, this is also one of the advantages of leaving the corporate world. You can kind of call yourself whatever you decide that you want to. And it was something that came to me in my particular case. I ended up on the Forbes list, and then, you know, here we are sort of officially off to the races.
Amazing. So in your line of work, do you, as a futurist, like I always think of, I watched this show years and years ago when I was a kid, about Nostradamus, and I was like, oh my God, this is like the most fascinating thing in the world. Do you rely strictly on data to view the future, or is there anything else that comes in play?
So there's a lot of different ways to structure what people do as futurists. And you can look online, there are like 12 different subsegments of it. Some of it's socially driven, some of it's data driven. But I think it, like, at its barest bones, there are people who are looking at the past and present and then pushing toward the future. And then there are people who are going way out here to the edge and saying, okay, what's possible? What do all these trends mean? And then trying to bring that into today's world and language to help people align with what's here and what's coming. I fall into that second camp, and both are needed, by the way. There's no one is better than the other, one voice is better. Both are needed, and though you will get very different perspectives, language, conversations. And so I dance between data-driven, data-informed, and what I call data receptive. So much of what we'll see in the market right now, we'll say, okay, we're in the exponential age of changing technology, but I actually think that we're way over here already in the quantum age, and that is being receptive to what's happening in the market right now.
Gotcha. What do you think the future holds that people aren't talking about that would surprise us?
I think what's going to blow people's minds, and this is why I have doubled down on the work that I'm doing, is that we cannot fathom how quickly things are already, but are going to change. It's so exponential change happens. Like we experienced it with the pandemic, this dynamic of, it seems like nothing's going on. What's this pandemic thing? And then like 1 or 2 people are sick, and then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes, right? That's the dynamic of exponential change, which feels like nothing's happening, something's happening. Oh my God, everything already happened. Like avocados getting ripe and then going bad. And what is happening right now is that across all industry sectors, technology is, and the disruptions and the shifts that are being caused by it and through it, and sort of on behalf of it, I guess, in some instances, are going to go through what I call these dynamics of convergence. So any one thing or any one industry having this size of disruption is a lot. But when these things start to come together, the world's going to change very, very quickly. And our brains were designed, evolved in situations that were local and linear. And so it's challenging for us to imagine, well, what's going to happen in 5 years if everything's totally different? So it's a more general answer to that question, but that's what's going to blow people's minds. It's just going to be moving so quickly.
Yeah. I think what's interesting to me is, sometimes when you think about the future, it can freak you the F out. Like
Totally.
It's like, wait a second, if you're a truck driver and you're like, wait a second, my whole industry is going to get wiped out, like that can freak you out. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me is, there's certain things, AI, and lots of other things that we've been talking about, because I'm in the talent space. Diversity, equity, and inclusion have been talked about for a long time. I still think we are like not even close to being where we need to be. Like there's a lot of people talking about it. I don't see a lot of companies actually doing something about it. So I'm curious from your standpoint, there's a lot of stuff that people talk about as if like it's going to happen tomorrow. That's actually going to take a long time. I mean, electric cars have been talked about for 50 years. I mean, now we're finally at the point where, it's getting a little bit more adoption, but there's a lot of stuff that in reality, it takes a lot longer to really take hold than we think. Mm-hmm. So what are some of those things that people are talking about now that we think are going to happen tomorrow that probably are still in the distant future?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, like the metaverse as sort of a practical application for all things and everything. It's here, it's coming. But like most things in all technology, right? So that there are actually, and you can check out, if you haven't read Peter Diamondi's book, and Peter Diamandis and Kotler wrote it together, The Future is Faster Than You Think. They walk through the 6 stages or phases of exponential change. And when you're also looking at the curves of technological adoption, there's always this second moment. So big announcement, big technology is coming into the world. It's so exciting. It's going to change everything. And then you're like, oh, wah, wah. It didn't do anything. Nobody adopted it. It's not that exciting. It actually sucks, like Second Life, the video game, or the first version of cell phones. And though it doesn't mean that evolution in those spaces stops. It means that at least initially, it's not as widespread, but as soon as the technology starts to make sense, things become more economically viable, then all of a sudden, it's that nothing, something, everything dynamic. It's like, boom, it hits the market super quickly. So the metaverse, rooted in the book Snow Crasher that was spoken about millions of years ago. We see it in that video game Second Life, in Roblox and other places. But Zoom itself is actually a metaverse of sorts, right? So we are not physically in the same room, but there's a whole way and manner of us communicating inside of here. We're looking at each other's avatars. So this as a concept, or particularly when we're looking at talent management, culture, interaction, connection, engagement, if we know that the world is moving toward a metaverse type world, then what can we put into place today in terms of our policy strategy structures? And to your point about DEI, how do we ensure that what we are creating is not embedded with the biases that we are living with and existing with today?
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. In my world, if you had told me 3 years ago that people would be hiring C-suite executives and never meeting them, I would say you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
Yet we see it now all the time, where people are being brought on for really high level positions and no face-to-face interviews. You know, a lot of the future, I think, scares people rather than excites them. But from an employee standpoint, what are some of the things that you think we should be excited about? I think the pandemic has kind of put, you know, being able to work virtual, and it's put some of that stuff on the fast track. What are some of the things that you see that we shouldn't be scared of? We should be actually really excited about it.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, all of this change is something that we should be excited about. So I do recognize, and I learned this early on in speaking about my discoveries along the path of the future of work, is that when someone comes in and says, the world is changing, everything's disrupting, jobs are going away, jobs are going to be created, what it sounds like is invalidation. It sounds like threat. It sounds like uncertainty, insecurity, and I get that, I understand it. And part of my own personal drive in doing this work is to say, okay, if I can help pick apart the scary parts, then I can come back to folks and say, hey, doesn't need to be scary. Here's where the opportunities are, and this is what they look like. So inside of this disruption, there's actually way more opportunity than we've ever had. It just looks different than the things that we're used to. And so as employees, in terms of coming and employers, the entire planet becomes our talent pool. And you know, back in 2015, there was data projected out that by 2025, 2026, there would be 4.4 billion additional people who have half the planet who have never had access to the internet, the educational and entrepreneurial opportunities coming online, right? And recent data that just come out from Ericsson says that we will be at about 7.7 billion smartphone subscriptions by 2027. So half the planet is now your talent pool. Half the planet now has a chance to work for the best companies in the world. The entrepreneurial genius that's hidden there and the possibilities that this can bring for society are just off the charts. So yeah, so that's something to be very excited about.
I forget the date and I forget a lot of the specifics. And I honestly, I don't remember if this was a podcast I was listening to or where I got this information, but it was basically talking about the fact that the population is slowing down. The growth of the population is slowing down. And there was some date, maybe 2040 or something like that, where they're basically saying there's not going to be enough workers. And companies are really going to be in a predicament, because if you think there's a war for talent now, wait until there's less people to pick from. What are your thoughts on that? And I wish I had all the specifics. It was a few weeks ago that I heard this, but sure. it sounded fairly dire.
Yeah, well, so let's everybody slow our roll for a minute and have a look at what's happening with the technologies that are coming online. So, and then even take a step back and say, can our planet really sustain growing at the rate that we're growing? So are we actually asking the right questions about this? But,
yep.
But when we're talking about a talent pool, yes, population might be shrinking, but when you look at what artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and quantum computers and mechanics will be able to do for efficiency in our work and working place, we're not going to need as many human beings doing the same kinds of work that they were doing before. And this is where, one of my big invitations to folks as we think through these things and how we even our perspective in terms of thinking as futurists, learning how to name, define, and challenge the assumptions that we have about what we think is or isn't true. And so that dire feeling comes from a feeling of scarcity, that there isn't going to be enough, but we're actually making a big shift from a world that was rooted in scarcity to a world that's rooted in abundance. And so there's actually going to be a lot more opportunity available for the people, for the companies, but the structures are going to look different. How we access this thing that we call work will become different. And even, I like to make a distinction between the conversations around the future of work and the future of working, because they're actually two separate interrelated, close, but they're separate ideas. The future of work, what is its role in society? How do we find our meaning in it? What are the efficiencies there that sort of push the economy along? And the future of working, what are the tools that enable this activity that we do, this thing that we call work? And what are the implications for that?
Interesting. What are your thoughts on, Gary Vee talks a lot about education. And I've heard him say numerous times that our higher education system will look very different in the future. And that, his, I guess, futuristic look is that the Ivies are going to be there, the Stanfords are going to be there. But all of these other schools may struggle to exist because there's so many other ways for us to learn. That seems so disruptive, just having, nieces and nephews who are so preoccupied with where am I going to school, and people spending exorbitant amounts of money to send their kids to schools that are, in my opinion, not going to really help them get a better job. I think some do, I think some don't. But what are your thoughts on kind of that future of education and how that plays a role in the future of work?
Yeah, so education is yet one more industry segment, and it's not immune to the same kinds of disruptions that every other corner of the economy is going through. And when you look at market drivers, even so, if we look at supply demand and companies, what they're asking for people to have done before they begin to apply, Ernst & Young, Apple, Google, and multiple others have dumped the criterion that people need to have had a 4-year college education in order to apply for a job. No longer necessary. So this gatekeeper is no longer. And not across the board necessarily, but again, there are also infinite ways to have access to free, much lower cost education that will get you a fast track to a job. And particularly if you're coming out of a community or a household where you don't have the privilege of having lots and lots of money, then why would you go to a 4th, 5th, 6th tier university for lots and lots of money if you can get a few certificates, get yourself trained at Google, and get yourself a multiple 6-figure job immediately after work? So the freak out moments come for students who are graduating and saying, oh my God, what if what I studied didn't, is not going to apply in the world and in the market going forward? And on the one hand, there's some truth to that, right? Because there are projections that by 2030, there will be, of all the jobs that will exist, 85% of them have not yet been invented. But on the other hand, I'd love to see a show of hands, but like, how many people are actually working in the thing that they studied in school?
Right.
Not that many.
Not many.
So you never have to have done anything in order to do something. So letting go of this notion that if I haven't prepared all the things and everything up until now, then I'm screwed for the rest of my life. No, right? Like let's take a few steps back and say, what do we want to create? What kind of impact do we want to have? How do we want to use our lives and careers? And then begin to look for opportunities in the market that look like that.
You know, you touched on something which is employee engagement. And I think, you know, you have the statistics. All I know is it's a shit show. I mean,
Yeah,
it is horrendous, you know, how poorly engaged, you know, employees are. What are your thoughts on reversing that trend, or do you think it's on its way to changing, maybe because of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think, so it has boggled my mind. And this was the reason that I left the corporate world in the first place. It's not, so the data will tell us that. And then my own practical experience of interviewing thousands of people all over the world, from the C-suite down to interns, having these conversations and more or less like, Scott, you're awesome. You can do this job, but why are we talking about this when you actually really want to be doing something totally different? That's where your passion lies. And, what the pandemic has brought us, right? So I think that what we're seeing with the Great Resignation, reshuffle, whatever it is that we're calling it now, is simply pent up demand and an awakening or a realization that actually, if we're spending more than half of our waking hours doing this thing that we call work, or if we aren't fulfilled in it or with it, we're losing out on a lot of potential happiness in our lifetimes, let alone the financial gains that come from doing something you're truly engaged in. So I think, you know, this is one of those things that looks like disruption, but feels like, but will or could actually be amazing opportunity for hiring organizations if you can start to help your people get the purpose thing down.
Yeah, it's amazing too that people sometimes get dumped on for wanting to be happy, and they're like, why? I don't, you know, it's people are bewildered, like, why are people leaving crappy bosses and toxic environments, and like, how dare you want to be happy? What?
Yeah, 100%. It's like, what and that's another thing that has always baffled me. It's like, are you kidding me? And I think, you know, there's also a wave of folks who are like, well, we just handled this. We just took this during our time. This is just what you do. You know, you swallow the bitter pill and, you know, hunker down. And, but why? Why? You know, a lot of my work is inspired in Joseph Campbell. And one of the things that he says is that people are not so much looking for the meaning of life as they're looking for the experience of being alive. And again, if we're spending half of our awake hours doing work and we're not feeling alive inside of that, feels like there's something off in that equation.
Yep. I think one of the things that concerns me, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that the complete avoidance of adversity is never going to help us build our resiliency muscles. So we're going to get toppled by stuff that's like, you know, a stiff breeze is basically going to knock us over. And I think it's dangerous to try to avoid all adversity, because that is truly, I mean, there's always going to be change. To me, as a business owner, I know there's a bus that's going to round the corner and hit me. And then when I recover from that, there's going to be another one and another. And the more times I'm able to, you know, navigate through 9/11, navigate through, you know, 2008, navigate through the pandemic, like I built that resiliency so that I'm able to overcome that. So I think, you know, anytime that pendulum shifts too much and people try to avoid adversity at all costs, to me, that seems like a huge mistake. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, huge mistake. And in fact, I would prescribe or offer the exact opposite. So one of the programs, I've developed a whole suite of leadership training for the exponential age. And one of the programs I created is called regenerative resilience. So why not just resilience? Because frankly, if we're alive today, we're human beings, we've been resilient. But we need something that in a sustained period of uncertainty with no foreseeable end in sight, we are actually able to take this disruption and change and channel it into something useful through which and with which we can thrive. And one of the practices inside of this is something that I call creative self-destruction. And what this means is, so a very dear friend of mine who's the CEO and founder of a company, of a clothing company down in Brazil, he and his management team do this, and they've had 167% growth year over year over year. I mean, it's phenomenal. So what they do is they say, okay, every 3 months, every quarter, every 6 months, they say, where do we want the company to be 6 months from now? Okay, great. They put some goals out there. And then they say, who are the people, if you're the CEO, if you're the CFO, if you're CHRO, what do you need to be able to do to run that company successfully? And they come up with a whole series of things. And then they say, am I that person today? Am I capable of fulfilling that role today? And usually the answer is no. But then, so what they do, instead of waiting for the market to disrupt them, that they go about retraining themselves, unlearning the things that they don't need to do anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're ready when that 6-month mark hits, they're prepared. And so I am much more in the camp of, and this has been my practical research experience as well, if you disrupt yourself and you get practiced at dancing with uncertainty, then when it happens, it doesn't mean you'll like it, especially at first. It doesn't mean it will feel good a lot of the time, but you've got this whole suite of tools where instead of being, knocked down on the couch or hiding in your bunker, or whatever Space Popcorn was saying, you actually say, okay, 15 minutes, I got it. We'll figure this out. And then you're off to the races.
Love it. Love it. All right. My time is up with you. So I've got to open it up to everyone else who wants to ask a question. So we're going to go first to Colorado, to Scott Garber.
Oh man, Elatia, well, first off, this is such a mind-bending conversation. I love the way that you have the ability to sort of see this futuristic mindset of like where we're going. And I've been very curious about this myself. And so my question is, when you look at the infrastructure of where we're at, married with the cycles of technology and how they're expediting, how do you start to bridge that chasm so that we can all sort of elevate to this plane of what the futuristic work world looks like? Because I think, like Neil Postman talks about these different cycles and they're condensing, but we're finding this big gap in just even bandwidth, right? So I'm really curious your thought of how do you level that playing field to go ahead and create a working environment there?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, so if we walk away from this conversation with zero other ideas, it's the notion that brain health, if you're running HR, if you're running a company, brain health is first and foremost the most important thing. And you'll notice that I don't say mental health only, I say brain health, because our ability to expand our ability, our cognition, our ability to dance with uncertainty becomes first and foremost, because that degree of uncertainty is going to change. And because the actual chemical processes that are going on in our body when we're dealing with uncertainty, which is cortisol, it's adrenaline, it's fight or flight, we need to learn how to control that. So brain health first and foremost. And frankly, if your organization is melting down and the people in your company are melting down, your company's not going to be successful. So this becomes a strategic imperative, number one. Then secondly, when we're looking at how the world is shifting. So if we can understand, even at a baseline, basic kind of feeling level, how the world is shifting. So what does it mean that the world is going from linear to exponential, from scarcity to abundance, from or to and? We can understand the future dynamics. So as I mentioned earlier, the metaverse, its future characteristics will be virtual avatars. We interact in these spaces. What about that could we translate to an analog world so that when the technology comes online, we're actually aligned with it and already moving toward it, even if it doesn't exist today?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'd love to have a conversation offline. I mean, there's just so many layers to this, right? And I think what the inclusive side of it is really what I'm trying to understand, because there is such a gap between the folks. It's not even the folks that have access. It's just the bandwidth that allows access. And so how do we learn from the cycles that we've had before, so we don't make the same mistakes regardless of the environment in which we're creating, whether that's in an analog or, you know, digital space. And so, but really appreciate your thoughts and time today.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you.
We are going to Randy in Florida. Randy,
Randy
you're
in
up.
Florida.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My question, I had two questions, but I'm going to go to one. And the question is, if you had loved ones, children's, nieces, nephews, who were, let's say, teenagers or college age, what would be the number one thing that you think they should be learning about or studying so that they're prepared for what the future has to hold? And thank you very much.
Thank you. Hands down, mental agility and flexibility. I mean, anything that you could do, you know, so I have 4 nephews, and when I talk to my brothers and their wives about their kids, and also college kids, everybody's coming to me with these questions, mental agility and flexibility. Because if the data is true, or even if some slice of it is true, and 85% of the jobs that are going to exist in the next 8 years haven't been invented yet, whatever we're learning today is not going to be a match for whatever's coming down the road. So the ability to be flexible in the face of disruption, to be able to thrive in uncertainty, to have this set of tools. And there are 3 ways, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but the ways that I actively teach now are through regenerative resilience, which is a program that I talked about, something that I call simultaneous strategy. So developing our ability to do now producing thoughts and future focused thoughts at the same time. Usually we think now and future separately, but being able to blend this kind of thinking. And then thirdly, empathetic curiosity. So you'll notice I don't say empathy there, I say empathetic curiosity, because there is no amount of frustrated that any of us can get to make our most frustrated employee feel happier. And so rather than getting down in the weeds with folks, there's actually a different related skill set, which is how can I be curious about what's going on with you, hear the nuggets that I need to hear, but then actually create from that. So mental agility and flexibility, hands down, those are 3 ways that I would go about practicing it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much.
Boom. That was like a mic drop moment. Phenomenal. We're going to Bruce in Georgia. Bruce, you're up with Elatia.
Bruce.
Elatia, thank you, and Scott for putting this platform on. And I think Randy kind of got to some of it. Maybe there's some other. I'll ask it maybe with a different twist to the question. We kind of seem like, at least in my world, it's been, you know, walking across the bridge made out of wood, but now we're walking across that same trouble on wood that's spinning in the water. Like this whole thing is moving so fast. So that's sort of my visual. What would you, as we think about human beings and being human as we move forward, what would you say some of the key traits are, not necessarily for the young nephews and nieces that are in high school or college, but what about that 25 to 35-year-old who's kind of got an experience of a one tempo and now just seeing, you know, the music just spinning so much faster? What do you think some of the key traits are that they need and we need to teach them to adapt?
Yeah, so I think, so this will go for that next subsegment, and then really for all of us, and especially the older we get, you know, those who are digital natives and being born into this world, their brain is already developing and is evolving in ways that are adapting much better to what's here and what's coming. But when we look at, you know, first and foremost, the willingness to let go of what was, the willingness to let go of how we thought the world was going to be. And this is what, when I talk about this notion of learning how to name, challenge, and define the assumption, name, challenge, and define the assumptions that we have about what's happening in the world, you know, how the world is, you know, as a capital IS, isn't. And so if we can be willing to become curious, so that would be the second thing. So, okay, if nothing is as they told us it would be, then what's here? And by the way, the folks who were telling us that it would be this way were doing the best with the information that they had at the time. Little could they have predicted that all of this was going to change. So an absolute curiosity, what's hiding in this for me that wasn't available to me before? And then thirdly, anchor in, you know, Carol Dweck's classic mindset. No, there is no wrong way to go about any of this. Nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody is feeling pretty lost, and that's okay. So loosening up these expectations, because I hear, and we're seeing the data come in, so much anxiety about what if I pick the wrong thing? What if things don't work out? What if I don't? And so loosening the need to be right about anything and learning techniques, which I also teach in the classroom, about how to celebrate what goes wrong, truly.
Fantastic. We're going to California. Chad, you are up.
I appreciate that, Scott. And Elatia, yeah, wow. This is trying to keep up and take all the notes here. Good thing we're recording this. So really appreciate this. Stanford, this isn't my main question, but I am curious, the continuing studies programs that you're involved with, is that for current students or is that for folks that have already graduated and are looking to continue their education? And I ask because my sister works at Stanford Children's Hospital. And I think this would be something that would be pretty cool to share with her to see if she had any interest in being a part of your program.
Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah, so it's open to everybody.
Oh, it is? Okay.
You have to have studied at Stanford or even work for Stanford. And the two classes that I have taught that are up until now are Prototype Your Future. So this is all about career design and the whole methodology that I created when I first left the corporate world. And then secondly, how to think like a futurist. So these notions that I was sharing with you about how do you do simultaneous processing? What are the thought frameworks and strategic frameworks that you utilize? So those are the two big classes that I teach there.
Is there a website that we can find more information with regard to this?
Send a note to me because I'm not, so they release their classes on a quarterly basis and I'm not teaching next quarter, but I will be in the fall time. And so I'll be happy to connect to you.
Okay, cool. And then my main question, or part B of that question, is you talk about Brazil, and I took notice of you being a voice on a Good Evening show out in Brazil. I'm curious of how that experience transitions or adds value to what you do in your day-to-day, or is this more of a hobby, or is this something that helps you connect with the public and gives you a little bit different perspective on responsibilities beyond what you do in the corporate world?
You mean my work in Brazil?
Yeah, I took notice that you're like a voice of a Good Evening show out from Brazil.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I spent a lot of years of my career working in Brazil and ran a foundation down there. And then as a global corporate executive, spent a lot of time working there. So I do spend a lot of time in Brazil. But for me, so the future of work, there is no conversation about the future of work without a conversation about the future of education, without a conversation about the future of information. And so being a voice of, on the nightly news and creating other components or collateral of information that goes out into the world, I see it as all interconnected. And that's when I talk about that big shift, moving away from a world of moving away from a world of or to a world of and, these things that were formerly separate, either we're talking about work or we're talking about education or we're talking about information, the barriers between those things begin to dissolve.
That's neat. Awesome. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Morgan in New York.
Morgan.
You're up with Elatia. I have never known Morgan to be shy. So Morgan, this could be a bathroom break. I have no idea.
I don't think the sound's working.
No, he's there. He's there. We just can't hear him.
All right. We're going to go to Ann O'Neill in Miami.
Yep.
And
Here he is, Scott.
We're going to stay with Morgan.
Apologies. Thank you. I worked it out. One click of the mouse. Hi, Elatia. Thanks for taking the time today. Hi. So touching on a few of the themes you've been discussing, I come from a background of machine-to-machine automation, conversational AI, and a lot of sort of the way in which we worked and built those technologies was modeled on a very synchronous way of human communication in terms of the modality, and certainly in looking at the pandemic and how it accelerated some of these trends. I've noticed, and certainly I'm not the only one, that those traditional modes of communication and collaboration, built around a very synchronous world, whether it's in person or remote, like Zoom, like Slack, like email, to an extent, became in a way disruptors themselves of how people work, right? I mean, and some of the statistics are pretty telling. I think 89% of people doing remote work say that it's the most unpleasant part of their workday, right? The constant Zooms and Slack interruptions. 44% dream of a video conference free workday. So when we think about the future of work, right, in the modern workplace being hybrid, distributed, remote, where do you see the enabling technologies come in? Where do you see perhaps asynchronous communication tools come in? And do you see that having an impact on people's ability to do the deep work that's necessary to move things forward and truly innovate?
Yeah, so this is one of those places where that distinction between the future of work and working really comes into play, because these are the tools that are enabling us to do this thing that we call work. And so I offer that we're actually, so hybrid will have its moment in time, but I think we're actually pushing toward an asynchronous world, especially as automation begins to impact more traditionally human done activities. And so pulling a chapter from the company Automatic, that's with 2 T's, they created Tumblr and, a whole series of other platforms, right? They were born in an asynchronous world. And so these tools of communication, and I agree, so I'm a verbal processor and visual processor. So for me, having to sit down and write an email is like it's challenging for me. And so, but learning how to communicate asynchronously with clarity, learning how to build teams that move in a much more agile fashion. And I'm not talking about agile project kind of stuff, but where people can much more seamlessly move in and out of projects thanks to the abilities, the communication ability that we do have. That's where I think that we're going. Asynchronous, and we can go into some of the conversation about like what culture looks like in that way. But yeah, so much of what we're doing right now, it's in the trough of deception of what this technology can do for us. Because I agree, no thank you to more Slack pings.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, Ann O'Neill in Miami.
Ann.
Hey, hi.
What's
Hey, everyone. All right, so I have a question on, either your research or your vision for what this question is going to be developed as. So I hear you talking about uncertainty and curiosity and having the purpose at work kind of in one bucket. And then we have this technology, quantum technology, AI, machine learning in another like Venn diagram bucket. What does that intersection look like where we're informing that technology for the future of like consciousness and not having bias? And I wanted to see what your research or just even your vision was for that.
Yeah, so I love that you framed this in sort of the separate Venn diagram piece. And I love that you use the word informing. So when we look at quantum physics, and not to go like way too nerdy on folks, but the minute I observe something, it becomes impacted by my observation, and then I become impacted by that interaction. And so we are actually in this continuous loop of impacting each other and then creating the impact. There's a whole lot of mechanics that go on behind that. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this moment in time, is that technologies that are now coming to the surface are going to show us what was already always true, which is that we are truly interconnected. Anything I do over here, although seemingly not relevant to whatever it is that you're up to, is actually impacting your life. And so this gives us or provides us an opportunity to say, how do I want to act in the world? And so one of the things that I also talk about in this model of shifting from scarcity to abundance is that we're moving away from fixed pie economics, zero-sum game, if I win, you lose, or vice versa, over to a world that I call bubbly economics, right? Where our definitions of value expand, and where each of us as an actor, now that can be an actor as an individual, an actor as an organization, community, society, government, whatever. If I am adding, like a bubble bath, if I add warm water to the equation, the value of the whole thing grows. So if I improve my education, if I add something of value, the value of the whole thing grows. If I'm a bad actor in that, the value of the whole thing shrinks. And so we will experience this more and more as time goes on. But yes, technology is going to show us what was already always true.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. It's been so awesome, so informative.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
Thanks, Ann. We're going to Howard K in Florida. You're up.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you for this. So I want to go back to education for a moment.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of, I don't know about a lot, but some kids that I know that have tremendous scores, 1560, 1580, 1600 on their SATs, 4.8, 5.0 GPAs, tremendous extracurricular activities. And we've absolutely seen a huge shift with the Ivy League universities as far as diversity and how they're, who they're accepting and who they're not. Many of these kids that I'm referring to have not been accepted. Now, maybe it's they're from Boca Raton, whatever it is. My question is, with this shift in the way the Ivy Leagues are picking their students, are they getting it right because they've moved away from the standardized testing and all these other things, and so much of this diversity and inclusion, are they getting the same cream of the crop? And with respect to those other kids that typically would have been accepted at these universities, how do you think their futures will be affected by them not being able to take advantage of that type of education?
So this is a can of worms. And my first question would be, challenging the world as it was. Were the schools really getting the best talent, or were they getting, a large portion of their talent from legacy donations, those who had been there in the first place? So whatever was best before, is it really best for everybody, or is it best for a small pool of people who have been long-term engaged with an organization? So I would also I would imagine that many of the folks who may not be getting in now because of legacy or shifts in policy or politics, if they don't go to Harvard, they'll probably go to Stanford or Yale or somewhere else. So like the access that folks who have had opportunities like this for such a long time is so much greater. I think all of these educational institutions are going to be actually much better off by having much more diversity of thought perspective in the places and spaces.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Howard, you always look like the busiest guy in the world. When I look at your desk, I'm like, man, this guy needs a vacation. He's working too hard. All right, Tom, in California, you are up with Elatia Abate.
Thank you. Hi, Elatia.
Hi, Tom.
Congrats on your move. It's exciting news.
Thank you. Warm weather all the way.
I agree. I'm a Bostonian and I'm retired. I'm done.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to say, I went back and listened to a talk you gave a couple of years ago with Tony Robbins. And I'm curious if it was during the pandemic or not. It was 2 years ago. But you talked about the importance of community and collaboration and what it was going to mean in the future for work. But then also you talked about we need to be more dynamic and freelance work, that it wasn't going to just be, skill set based. It was going to be value based. And I'm curious if the pandemic either sped that up or if you had some good insight to that.
Yeah, so the pandemic has sped up all of these trends that were on the horizon anyway. So if we look at and there are a few different points that you made there. So we think of the past of work as salaried, the future of work is entrepreneurial. And entrepreneurial can mean a lot of different things. It could be, I'm growing a scalable unicorn. It can mean I'm a small business owner. It can mean I'm a solopreneur and therefore need to learn how to manage a business and do sales and all these other things. Or it can be working for a larger, more traditional organization that is now demanding that you have the skills of entrepreneurship. And so, so in that being dynamic or being able to shift over into a world of entrepreneurial, that's the point that I was making there. In terms of collaboration and strength in networking community. So I don't like to talk about networking. I like to talk about community building. Because networking is very transactional. It's if I give you X and you give me something of X value in return, then we're good. But there's a whole dynamic of take, like what can I get from you and how can I get more from you than you're willing to give in the first place. Whereas if you shift over into community building, it's all about discovering the value that you can add. And so learning about those who are around you, what they're up to, what their needs and challenges might be, what their opportunities are, then we can, in that world of bubbly economics, where if we're good actors, we can support everybody growing. That becomes critically important. And then, so you said dynamics in entrepreneurship. You also asked about this shift around working. There was a third thing in there that I'm not sure.
Around freelance work.
Around freelancing. Yeah. So again, the data have told us that year after year, here in the US, it was 23%, then 34%. Shifting over to contract work. Data that came out in 2018, more than half of the new jobs since 2010 that had been created in Europe were freelance and contract work. So no longer solely administrative roles, but medical doctors and senior executives. And this is another place where that distinction between the future of work and the future of working come into place. Right? So what happens in a world where this thing that we call job, that provides security and identity and a role in society and a tax base for governments and all these things, doesn't exist? Not in the way that we were used to. What does this mean for our identity? What does it mean for our social stability and safety net? Particularly countries like the US and Turkey, where our health safety is often wound up with our jobs. What does this actually mean? And so this is an opportunity, I think, for us to say, given that we're here in this moment in time, what do we want to create?
Great. I also think, Scott was ahead of the curve, right, with the Talent Champions Council. I see that group and community, the way that he's building that. But then also a lot of the other speakers we've had on too, Allies of Glory with Tony Nebbs, Overcome Army with Jason Redman. So I do see a huge amount of value in that community base. So thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
We have time for one last question. So if any brave soul wants to just jump in, feel free. We've got one more question.
I'll take it if possible.
Dennis.
Beautiful.
You're up.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for your time, and it's been very informative and thought-provoking session. So it's thank you for that. And I actually also wondered for some time, specifically due to truck and shift, because this is realistically it's going to cause a global shift. There are probably about 6 million people, at least in the US, that are going to be directly affected by it. Not just truck drivers. I think there's about 3 million plus people that support them. And then on top of that, all the restaurants that are on routes that rely on basically trucking as their sole source of income, all the small restaurants and so forth. So so what are some of the thoughts, and what would you tell some of those small business owners, some restaurant owners, and what are some of the thoughts of what will their lives look like, and how will it shift, because the life as they know is going away?
Yeah, well, that is the reason why I got into this line of work in the first place, because at that very conference, I started going down the rabbit hole of, what about the truck drivers and the mom and pop gas stations and the diners and all of the ancillary industries that have grown up around this. So it's not just a one hit impact, what we do over here impacts what's happening over there. So first and foremost, right, this isn't all doom and gloom, and it's not going to happen, in the next 20 minutes. So let's take a breath for a moment and say, okay, but since we know it's coming, since we already know, and in fact, we have a map, right? The technology and the companies that are producing this technology are coming out into the world. Economists are saying, here are the industries, here are the job titles, here are the companies that will likely be most impacted by this. So we see what industries are in ascension and decline, what jobs are up to be replaced by robots or computerized. That gives us enough time to say, okay, if I can see my role is going to be taken over, now is the day. Today's the day where I need to say, okay, what's the job that hasn't been invented yet that's coming on the horizon? How might I be able to retrain myself? What other skills might I want to adapt? How could I get my current employer to pay for and invest in what's coming for our next step? And some people might say, oh, but I don't want to change my job, or I don't want to do this. And this is where that being willing to let go of the past and the way things are or were becomes important. And it doesn't mean that it feels good, but we actually have the tools in our hand right now to see what's going to be unfolding. And so I would stop and say, what's going to happen in my industry, or what can I tell best case scenario is going to be happening here? What steps would I like to take to empower myself moving forward?
Because there needs to be a huge educational process with those small business owners and so forth, because they need to be transparent with their employees as well, that this is the time for the employees to start looking in other directions.
Yeah, if they can see it, yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elatia, this has been unbelievable. And my question for you is, what does the future look like for Elatia Abate, other than sunnier weather in Orlando?
Yeah, other than sunnier weather. Well,
and
for me,
maybe a book.
Yeah.
I think you need it, right?
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled. More announcements on that soon. And right now I'm heavy into leadership development for the exponential age. So actually, when I get off of this call, I'm going to be training a big global environmental concern on regenerative resilience, and I'm working with several other multinationals and bringing this training so that we can prepare ourselves and our leaders and ourselves as leaders to thrive in this age of the unknown.
This has been unbelievable. We are now a community. We're a little over a year old. We've got 500 members in 29 countries and growing very fast. What can we do to be a resource to you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love those of you who have already connected with on LinkedIn, please do. Let's connect. And I think the big invitation is, how are we preparing our leaders, and how might we work together to prepare our leaders for now and the future? Because everything that we've learned from the industrial age, it doesn't fit the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing.
Amazing.
Connect with me. Let's work together.
You were incredible. Thank you so much for carving out time today. Everybody that's been on the call, thank you for carving out time. I know you've got lots of options of what you could be doing, and I appreciate you spending the time with us. Elatia Abate, you are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. This has been great.
We're gonna stay on. Elatia, you're free to go, but we're gonna stay on for a little overtime. If anyone wants to hang out for about the next 15 minutes, some of us are gonna stay on.